I mean, I'm not arguing in favor of illegal immigration. I'm asking how you would deal with the knock-on effect of your proposal to remove millions of people who work in a critical part of the economy.
But of course, she is arguing for illegal immigration because she's specifically saying that we need these illegal immigrants to be here. J.D. Vance, senator from Ohio, is the running mate for Donald Trump. And unlike Tim Walz, unlike Kamala Harris, he's actually granting interviews across the board. Hostile media, friendly media, press conferences, sit-downs, whatever you want. And he found himself sitting across from a New York Times podcaster who was challenging a basic premise about deporting illegal immigrants in this country because, well, think of the fallout. Think about how deporting illegal immigrants was going to affect the economy, right? There's no argument here about whether people should be here legally or illegally or not. There's no comment here about whether they've broken the law, these illegal immigrants. No, the argument is you shouldn't enforce the law and actually do what the law dictates, which is deporting those in the country illegally, because it will affect our economy. Watch how this goes for her.
The reason that there is a housing crisis is that not enough houses have been built.
And that we have 25 million people who shouldn't be here.
Well, I mean, this is the thing.
I think it's both.
I know you do. I don't think that many people who look into this agree with you, but about a third of the construction workforce in this country is Hispanic. Of those, a large portion are undocumented. So how do you propose to build all the housing necessary that we need in this country by removing all the people who are working in construction?
This is a fascinating argument, which, by the way, I'm thrilled this intellectual, and you know she's intellectual because she's wearing glasses. This intellectual over at the New York Times is engaged in because it's actually honest, it's frank, it's real, it's actually what Democrats think. How can you possibly deport all of these people who are working in construction? By the way, how are they working in construction? They're not supposed to legally be working here. Right. So they're continuing to break the law. You know, they always say, you know, just because you're in the country illegally, that doesn't mean you're a lawbreaker. No, they're continuing to break the law because they're making money, earning money. You know, when you go get a job and you have to show a passport or driver's license, birth certificates to fill out your I-9 form, they're falsely filling out an I-9 form and they've got fake documentation. Oh, there's another law they've broken. They've acquired fake and phony identification. Could actually be tantamount to identity theft. That would be another law that they're breaking, but it's fine. Never worry about that. The argument here is how can you deport them all? Because we need them to we need them to build all of the housing that you want to construct here, J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, because we've got a housing crisis in this country. Now, first of all, that's not why we have a quote unquote housing crisis in this country, but take her argument for a minute. We need someone to build these homes, and these illegal immigrants are working in construction. So if you get rid of them, who's going to build the houses? That's literally what these elitist liberals think. That's in their little world. That's how they encapsulate this. They're basically arguing, hey, we need all of this low-paid slave labor that we've imported illegally from other countries. We need these people from other nations to build this stuff. So what's the problem? And they don't even see it because of the bubble they're living in. J.D. Vance sees it, and he pops that bubble.
Well, I think it's a fair question because we know that back in the 1960s, when we had very low levels of illegal immigration, Americans didn't buy houses, didn't build houses, but of course they did. And I'm being sarcastic, of course, in service of a point, Lulu. The assumption that because a large number of home builders now are using undocumented labor, that's the only way to build homes. I think, again,
the country is much bigger. The need is much bigger. I mean, I'm not arguing in favor of illegal immigration. I'm asking how you would deal with the knock-on effect of your proposal to remove millions of people who work in a critical part of the economy.
But of course, she is arguing for illegal immigration because she's specifically saying that we need these illegal immigrants to be here to build these homes. And of course, the assumption is that if they go away, houses won't be built. There would be no possible way to build houses anymore if illegal immigrants, undocumented people from foreign countries who are undermining the labor force in this country and the market and the wages for that labor force weren't here to do that. That's 100% an argument on behalf of illegal immigration. And even more so, it's an argument on behalf of the very few, very wealthy real estate developers, commercial real estate and private home residence real estate developers that the New York Times, is carrying water for right now, and their illegal behavior in hiring illegal immigrants. That's who the Democrats have become. That's who the liberals have become now. Listen, I'm all for free trade. I'm all for, the idea of a complete and total free market working within our country. The problem is we have a welfare state that subsidizes and entices people to come here illegally. That's not a free market concept. If you got rid of the welfare state, got rid of all the goodies, got rid of all the handouts, and had a very real free market where everybody's competing for labor and for jobs on an equal footing, you didn't have these regulations set up where if you hire someone who's a citizen, who has a Social Security card, who actually is here in the country legally, well, then you have to pay him this kind of wage, and you have to pay him these kind of benefits, and you have to take care of them in this kind of level as an employee, because we've set up laws at the state and federal level to ensure that someone who's a citizen in this country gets those kind of labor protections. But if you hire somebody undocumented in this country and who's here illegal and you can pay him under the table, well, you can undermine all of that law. That's not a free market. And suddenly you've got a very lopsided world, and that's the world that this woman from the New York Times, and the New York Times by extension, is advocating for. Let's keep undermining legal employment and the legal means of building houses and buildings in this country, subsidizing it and subsidizing all those rich, wealthy developers with illegal labor that access. Listen, Democrats are the party of slavery. So, it's kind of hard for them to shake that habit. It's just slavery under a different name. Let's get back to JD here.
Well, I think that what you would do is you would take, let's say, for example, the 7 million prime age men who have dropped out of the labor force, and you have a smaller number of women, but still millions of women prime age who have dropped out of the labor force. You absolutely could re-engage folks into the American labor market. This is, I think,
To work in construction?
of course you could.
The unemployment rate is 4.1%. Most people who
unemployment rate, Lulu, this is important.
But most people who don't work can't work in the regular economy. They're in the military, they're parents, they're sick, they're old. They might not want to work in construction.
All right, so this is a perfect example. If you saw what just happened here, is that first of all, she was shocked. What? You're telling me that people will work in construction? We American citizens don't do that sort of thing. White people won't do that sort of thing. That's for the brown and black people that we import here so that they can work for pennies on the dollar. But also, did you see that she immediately pulled up notes that she is reading from her laptop, reading talking points, and she doesn't even listen to JD Vance counter. Understand, JD Vance just said 7 million prime age men in this country. That's 7 million people of prime working age who, yes, could work construction, could benefit from working construction, and by the way, could provide for their families by having such a testosterone-filled great job out in the outdoors, swinging a hammer and constructing homes. They have been removed. They have removed themselves from the job market because there's nothing satisfying for them. And they're ready, willing, and able to get back into the job market. But if they try to get a construction job, they're told to go away. And she just talked right over that and started talking about the unemployment rate, which has nothing to do with people who aren't in the job market. Watch her look at her notes as soon as she tries to make this claim.
Of course you could.
Look, right there.
The unemployment rate is 4.1%. Most people
unemployment rate, Lulu, this is important.
But most people who don't work can't work in the regular economy. They're in the military, they're parents, they're sick, they're old. They might not want to work in construction.
They have convinced themselves that these are jobs that real Americans won't really do. So that's why we need to import people from them. She quotes a 4.1% unemployment rate, but that doesn't include people who have actually removed themselves from the economy, that are driving Uber or Uber Eats or something like that because they couldn't get a regular job. And so they're working outside of the confines of the regular employment world. The unemployment rate only measures people who were in work, have lost their job, and now are trying to find a job again, a W-2 job, a regular job that you have to, prove your citizenship to have. So she parrots all of those talking points from the left, and now JD Vance is ready. He pounces.
Unemployment rate does not count labor force participation dropouts. And again, this is one of the really deranged things that I think illegal immigration does to our society, is it gets us in a mindset of saying we can only build houses with illegal immigrants when we have 7 million, just men, not even women, just men who have completely dropped out of the labor force. People say, well, Americans won't do those jobs. Americans won't do those jobs for below the table wages. They won't do those jobs for non-living wages, but people will do those jobs. They will just do those jobs at certain wages. And think about this from the perspective of an American company, okay? I want them to go searching in their own country for their own citizens. Sometimes people who may be struggling with addiction or trauma, get them re-engaged in American society. We cannot have an entire American business community that is giving up on American workers and then importing millions of illegal laborers. That is what we have thanks to Kamala Harris's border policies. I think it's one of the biggest drivers of inequality. It's one of the biggest reasons why we have millions of people who have dropped out of the labor force. Why try to re-engage an American citizen in a good job if you can just import somebody from Central America who's going to work under the table for poverty wages? It is a disgrace, and it has led to the evisceration of the American middle class.
And it led to the evisceration of that New York Times podcaster because that was ugly. And there's a cleanup on aisle 3 right now that's waiting because she is just left in a heaping pile of rubble. That was amazing. And understand where the lines are drawn now. And you may not be used to this. I know it's disorienting. We've gone a long way from the Laffer curve and Jack Kemp and free markets and free trade and no tariffs. And as long as we can construct things that are cheap, that ends up helping everyone in this country. No, there has been a bit of a shift here. And you've got Democrats, liberal elites, Ivy League college educated Democrats represented by this woman at the New York Times, advocating for exploiting cheap labor for the benefit of keeping housing down. But that ends up, as JD Vance just pointed out, sending millions of American citizens who normally would be laborers in that field out into devastating lives now. They may be suffering from addiction now. They may be because they feel shiftless. They feel like they don't have a future. They don't have the ability to actually do a job and get a good, honest pay and raise their families. And now Republicans, personified in JD Vance and Donald Trump, are the ones who are championing their cause. Yes, even if that means that housing developers and commercial real estate developers are going to have to pay more for their labor. That's better for our country, better for our citizens. And by the way, you'll end up getting better quality work in your construction jobs instead of exploiting imported illegal labor in this country. I don't know about you, and I don't know what side is going to end up winning, but I think that those who are interested in engaging American citizens with these kind of jobs rather than exploiting people from other countries with cheap under-the-table jobs as illegal laborers in this country, I think those people are on the side of the angels. And the people who are interested in exploiting people of other colors and other races from other countries so that they can keep their housing costs low, I don't think they're on the side of the angels. You tell me what side they're on. And this extrapolates well beyond just this. That includes restaurant workers. It includes gardeners. It includes, all the people who do the dirty jobs that woman from the New York Times can imagine any rational American ever wanting to do. Cleaning toilets, cleaning out hotel rooms, being janitors, being, when we were all younger, those jobs were not taken by people from other countries who don't speak our language and come here illegally. They were done by people in the working class here in America. And she can't fathom it. She can't fathom that these jobs were once taken by other people. It's a remarkable moment, actually, in the political zeitgeist of America. And here we are 3 weeks away from the election, and JD Vance just laid it out there perfectly. By the way, can you imagine a Democrat politician sitting opposite the equal of the New York Times and engaging in this kind of interview and sparring over economic issues in such a way when she has notes, he does not? But here's what's remarkable. That wasn't even JD Vance's greatest moment this weekend. Let's turn to ABC News. ABC News, Martha Raddatz tried to make a big deal out of Donald Trump saying at his rallies that apartment buildings in Aurora, Colorado had been taken over by Venezuelan gangs. And that's the truth. Apartment buildings in Aurora, Colorado had been taken over by Venezuelan gangs. These gangs took over the buildings and started collecting rent from the people who lived in those buildings. And the building owner couldn't do anything about it. So she attacks JD Vance because Donald Trump has said this. And watch how she frames this out. This is amazing.
Understand what you're saying, that some people left behind, but he's making these statements that the mayor is flat out disputing.
Well, Martha, you just said the mayor said they were exaggerated.
Grossly
that
exaggerated.
Means that there's got to be some that means there's got to be some element of truth here. And of course, President Trump was actually in Aurora, Colorado, talking to people on the ground. And what we're hearing, of course, Martha, is that people are terrified by what has happened with some of these Venezuelan gangs.
Senator Vance, I'm going to stop you because I know exactly what happened.
Martha.
I'm going to stop you. The incidents were limited to a handful of apartment complexes, and the mayor said our dedicated police officers have acted on those concerns. A handful of problems.
Only, Martha, do you hear yourself? Only a handful of apartment complexes in America were taken over by Venezuelan gangs, and Donald Trump is the problem and not Kamala Harris's open border. Americans are so fed up with what's going on, and they have every right to be. And I really find this exchange, Martha, sort of interesting because you seem to be more focused with nitpicking everything that Donald Trump has said rather than acknowledging that apartment complexes in the United States of America are being taken over by violent gangs. I worry so much more about that problem than anything else here. We've got to get American communities in a safe space again. And unfortunately, when you let people in by the millions, most of whom are unvetted, most of whom you don't know who they really are, you're going to have problems like this. Kamala Harris, 94 executive orders that undid Donald Trump's successful border policies. We knew this stuff would happen. They bragged about opening the border, and now we have the consequences, and we're living with it. We can do so much better, but frankly, we're not going to do better, Martha, unless Donald Trump calls this stuff out. I'm glad that he did.
Okay, let's just end that with they did not invade or take over the city, as Donald Trump said. I want to move on to
just a few apartment complexes, no big deal.
A few apartment complexes that the mayor did not seem was invading the entire city. Let's move on to women and abortion.
Wow. That's amazing. Thank you to Newsbusters there for the video clip, as always. So think this through for a minute here. First of all, I do love the part where she says, Mr. Vance, Senator Vance, let me just jump in here because I know exactly what happened. And then she goes to read a statement from the mayor. So she doesn't know exactly what happened. She knows what the mayor of Aurora has told her to say. Okay, number one. But number two, that moment, it was just a handful of apartment complexes that were taken over by Venezuelan gangs. And apartment complexes, by the way, how many hundreds of units are in an apartment complex? How many hundreds or thousands of Americans were intimidated and bullied and terrorized by murderous Venezuelan gangs? And Martha Raddatz is fine with that. Back of her hand, she dismisses it. A handful of apartment complexes. It's just a handful of apartment complexes. By the way, not for nothing, this is Martha Raddatz's home in Alexandria, Virginia. It was bought in 2016. It's valued at over $2 million. I mean, something tells me that if her home were taken over by a Venezuelan gang and she had to pay rent to them, or if she was kicked out of the home so that the Venezuelan gang should take over, I think that she would be bothered by that. Don't you think? Or if her child was living in that apartment complex that has now been taken over by a Venezuelan gang, or her mother, or anyone that she actually knows or cares about. And of course, it's not anyone she knows or cares about. It's just some random American citizen there in flyover country that had to deal with it. Or for that matter, the owner of that building. You know, the person who actually owns the property that has been stolen and absconded by Venezuelan gangs. But, you know, Martha Raddatz, it's just a handful of apartment complexes. I'm curious, Martha, clearly you're not concerned about a handful of apartment complexes, but that does suggest that if it reached a certain number of apartment complexes, then you would be concerned. Then you would say this is a valid argument to make. So what is that threshold? Is it 10 apartment complexes? Is it 15 apartment complexes? It's really just a negotiation at this point in terms of how many apartment complexes would be taken over by murderous Venezuelan gangs before you actually decide, yes, okay, this is a legitimate issue. Also, one other thing about this, Martha Raddatz, you've, of course, conceded now on your Sunday news show that this did happen, even though the governor of Colorado denied that this had happened at all until the next day when he couldn't deny it because the truth was out there. You've acknowledged that this happened, Martha Raddatz. I'm curious, how many segments did you do on ABC News about this issue? Did it show up on the evening news? Did it show up on Good Morning America? Did you do any segments on This Week? Has ABC News covered this story at all? American citizens displaced and terrorized by murderous Venezuelan gangs in the middle of our country in Aurora, Colorado, multiple buildings taken over, and the owner of those buildings completely basically robbed of his property and bullied and intimidated by these people. Did you cover that at all? In fact, isn't it true that the only reason you're covering this is because Donald Trump mentioned it at a rally in a way that you didn't like? He used words describing this in a way that you found offensive. And so you're not really covering it now, are you? You're covering the words Donald Trump used to describe it. And that's really all you want to talk about. This is the state of American journalism right now. And one other thing about this issue in Colorado, the building owner, CBZ Management, they took to social media, they took to X on Saturday, and they laid out the truth about it. Gangs have taken control of several of our properties in Aurora, Colorado. In an attempt to discredit this fact for political purposes and avoid governmental accountability, some have spread false information about our situation. By the way, that's Martha Raddatz, and that's the mayor of Aurora. But here's a synopsis of what actually happened.
See if you can find that story on the Venezuelan gangs taking over the apartment building in Colorado.
We have new information on what we've learned is happening inside an apartment complex. This video shows armed men walking through a building, knocking on doors, and entering an apartment. The apartment complex is at 12th and Dallas and Aurora.
In doing so, have taken over several apartment complexes.
Venezuelan gangs are taking over the real estate. They're becoming real estate developers. And they have...
Do they get little cards?
Their little card is a bullet.
Yes. Kamala Harris will work to deliver on that and secure the border.
Who's to blame? Carousel, if you will, continues. The city says the property management team is simply not doing enough to help these residents. And an interview with that property management team last week, they say that that building is actually being controlled by a certain gang, and they feel helpless. There's nothing they can do about it.
They've, in fact, have kind of pushed out the property management through intimidation and then collected the rents, and arrests have been made, but these operations are still ongoing.
That's right. And you heard right
See if
there
you can
that
find that story.
they were blaming the property managers. The property manager is this, CBZ Management. We started managing these buildings when new owners acquired the Colorado properties in 2019. At the time, the properties were in poor condition. Our mission was to renovate them, thereby increasing their value. It was an ambitious project. We also undertook a complete renovation of nearly every unit in the now well-known building you've seen in the news. Everything was progressing smoothly, property values were rising, and vacancy rates were dropping. It was win-win for both the owners and the city of Aurora. Then the gangs arrived. After some time, we noticed a rise in crime and tenant complaints. The most alarming moment occurred when our local CBZ representative was attacked at the end of 2023. He had gone to inspect a recently vacated 3-bedroom apartment, and he was met with gangs of squatters. There's the representative of the property management. This was in 2023. He was beaten up to a pulp. After the attack on our CBZ representative, we began getting threatening text messages. We frequently found people illegally occupying newly vacated apartments during scheduled tours. It was initially attributed to an influx of migrants exploiting squatter laws. We even received a call from a tenant returning from vacation only to find strangers living in his apartment. This legitimate tenant was forced to find a new home after police couldn't help him. When confronted, many of these illegal tenants and squatters claimed they had already paid rent, which we soon realized was true, but not to us. They were paying rent to a different entity. Gangs who took over and started collecting rent. And then this is how local news covered it at the beginning.
As far as what happens next, the city says unless the property owners remedy every single documented violation, the city will designate the building as unsafe due to its condition, not because of gangs.
That's right. The city claimed that the building owners and the property managers were in violation of city codes. But of course, it was because they couldn't go and do anything in the building because it had been taken over by gangs. Finally, one councilwoman, Danny Jurinsky, decided to take action after one of our last remaining legitimate tenants, Cindy Romero, reached out to her in desperation. Cindy had her own cameras. Most of ours had been destroyed by the gangs, and she provided video proof. This is when everything changed in Aurora about this story.
There have been rumblings of new gang activity in Aurora all summer. Officials have skated around the topic, but now there's video and victims they can't deny.
It's really like being held hostage.
Cindy was a prisoner in her own home. She's lived in this building at 12th and Dallas for years. This summer, when crime got worse, Cindy got cameras.
And that woman, Cindy Romero, this weekend showed up on stage next to Donald Trump in Colorado at a rally. She told her story. Nobody believed her until she actually brought the video cameras. The city government didn't believe her. The media didn't believe her. But now they do. Cindy Romero, appearing with Donald Trump at the rally, told her story again, confirmed that these Venezuelan gangs coming here illegally because of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's border policies had taken over and terrorized those buildings, continue to do so. And at the end of her remarks, she said to the crowd of Trump supporters, "Thank you for believing me." That's all she wanted, but nobody would believe her, because her story was damaging to Democrats. Her story was damaging to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Even worse, it helped Donald Trump make his case. The management company in Colorado finished with this. Despite clear evidence, many still deny the reality of the situation, sometimes using us as scapegoats. That's why we're no longer staying silent. We'll continue to counter falsehoods with simple facts and evidence. Yes, gangs did take control of our apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado, and the government did nothing. That is the real story, which brings us back to ABC News and Martha Raddatz, who again interrupted JD Vance because she knew exactly what happened in Aurora, Colorado. Remember?
I'm going to stop you. The incidents were limited to a handful of apartment complexes, and the mayor said our dedicated police officers have acted on those concerns. A handful of problems.
Only, Martha, do you hear yourself? Only a handful of apartment complexes.
I think that may be my favorite part. JD Vance couldn't even believe it. Martha Raddatz, with a wave of her very well manicured liberal elite hand, living in her $2+ million home in Alexandria, Virginia, says it was only a handful of apartment complexes. And even JD Vance couldn't believe what he was hearing. Do you hear yourself, Martha? I don't think Martha does hear herself, but we hear her. We know exactly where the media stands right now, and we know exactly where JD Vance, Donald Trump, and the Republican ticket stands on very real problems facing very real Americans. Election day is 3 weeks from tomorrow. And you just saw every single reason to make up your mind today.